Our first witness is Mr. Richard Gere. He is chairman of the International Campaign for Tibet, headquartered in Washington, D.C. Of course, Mr. Gere is an internationally known actor, social activist, and philanthropist who's worked for more than 25 years to advocate for human rights of the Tibetan people and preserve the Tibetan culture. He's also co-founder of Tibet House US and creator of the Gere Foundation. He has co-sponsored 5 historic visits to the United States by the Dalai Lama. And Mr. Gere, I understand you had a recent addition to your family. Congratulations on your new son. Thank you for being here. Mr. Gere, if you can, if you're there, please proceed with your opening statement.
I'm here somewhere.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I mean, this is all a bit bizarre. I certainly prefer this face-to-face, but let's engage each other anyhow. Chairman Cornyn, Ranking Member Casey, members of the committee, thank you so much for your introduction and inviting me to testify. It's been 35 years since I first testified in Congress, and that was on behalf of our Central American brothers and sisters, and then, of course, on Tibet for the last 30 years or so. Tibet has certainly been my compass that has helped me navigate through the world, and certainly through Washington, and probably through all of my life. This is the first time I've testified before the Senate since I last met with one of your greatest colleagues, John McCain. He was a good man. He was a good friend. He was a good friend of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and of the Tibetan people. He certainly was the best of us. And like John McCain and many of you, I'm sure, I hope that our government can deliver at its best, not only for the American people, but for the millions of people all over the world who look to us, look to the United States and its democracy and its freedoms and its openness as a source of inspiration and refuge while they live under oppression and violence. American leadership is at its best when it sets its view beyond the horizon and looks with balanced confidence at the challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead. But the rise of China in the world today is not something beyond our horizon. It's right here. It's right in front of us. It's in our face and affects our daily lives, our workplaces, our freedoms, our privacy, our health. Obviously, we're finding out. Our elections. And it will certainly shape the future of our world. After looking at the committee's work on the Chinese government's plan since 1949 to replace the US on the world stage and advance the Communist Party's authoritarian model everywhere in the world, I'm happy to offer my experience to this existentially important conversation. The conversation about the future of our relationship with the Chinese is crucial, not only to the US, and frankly, we've been tragically naive under both Republican and Democratic administrations, but is equally crucial for our democratic allies. I've been involved in supporting Tibetan people and the vision of His Holiness the Dalai Lama for peaceful coexistence with the Chinese government for almost 40 years now. When it comes to China, Tibet supporters have been in for the long haul, let's say. We knew that what was happening in Tibet would not stop there, and that China's authoritarianism would expand well beyond Tibet, as now we see in Xinjiang, now especially in Hong Kong and beyond China's borders. Now, clearly, we have no quarrel with the Chinese people. They're wonderful people. They're the same as us. We wish the Chinese people to enjoy development and quality of life improvements and opportunities and joy and happiness for their families and for their children. But what I fear is the Chinese Communist Party's model of development that is predicated on control, dominance, and violence. Chinese leaders have often quoted an old Chinese proverb in private, Wai Ru Ne Fa. On the outside, be benevolent. On the inside, be ruthless. I recall vividly a time in the 90s when a very strong bipartisan coalition of members of Congress called on the White House many times to condition China's most favored nation status on clear criteria that would protect the rule of law and human rights. That coalition, unfortunately, was defeated by powerful interests with short-sighted financial goals and a very naive understanding of China's 100-year plan, which they're probably 50 years ahead of already. Conventional wisdom was that by opening our markets to China, this would somehow and by itself produce meaningful political and social reforms. As we now know, the opposite has proven to be true, with more restrictions imposed, Communist Party control of religion, mass incarceration, crackdowns on all forms of dissent, including concealing critical information about the spread of the coronavirus. We also see the Chinese government using economic policies to prey on weaker countries through the extremely dangerous Belt and Road Initiative, their long-term plan to control natural resources, supply chains, trade, ports, and sea lanes. The point I'm trying to make here is that the environmental, human rights, and worker rights reforms we advocated for then would have also protected the larger economic interests of the US and our allies now. Let me give an example. The US opened its doors to Chinese products, Chinese investments, and various forms of Chinese cultural influence, including state media. We've even allowed state-sponsored Confucius institutes to gain a foothold in our universities, and Chinese companies like Huawei to spend large sums of money to lobby the US and enter the US markets. But as you also know, China does not reciprocate. Access to Chinese market is limited. They do not allow American media to broadcast in China. This lack of reciprocity, fueled by an Orwellian system of state censorship and powerfully restricts the Chinese people's access to information, and American and foreign media companies' access to one of the world's largest media markets. In fact, China has repeatedly insisted that US tech companies accept strict censorship to gain access to its 1.4 billion people. Another example is freedom of movement. Americans have a strong interest and appreciation for the Tibetan people, for the unique Buddhist culture, and their fragile, very beautiful land. It's the roof of our world. It's the third pole, and it is the greatest source of the world's fresh water. But here's what happens in Tibet. The Chinese government highly restricts access to Tibet for Americans, including journalists and politicians, like no other areas of China, while Chinese citizens face no such limitations when they visit the US. They go where they want. Now, Congress recently took action and passed the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act. This is a good, very rational and systematic response, and we hope the State Department will implement it soon, as required by law now. As an actor, which is why I'm here, I think, I know you're interested in my experience in the entertainment industry and growing Chinese influence there. Well, I can't say that my speaking out for human rights in China has directly affected my career. I'm probably an unusual case, and we can talk about that more in the Q&A session. There's no doubt that the combination of Chinese censorship, coupled with American film studios' desire to access China's market, can lead to self-censorship and to avoiding social issues that great American films once addressed. Imagine Marty Scorsese's Kundun, about the life of the Dalai Lama, or my own film, Red Corner, which is highly critical of the Chinese legal system. Imagine them being made today. Wouldn't happen. As I conclude my remarks, I'd like to call your attention to two bills in the Senate. The first is sponsored by Senators Cardin, Casey, Cornyn, Rubio, and Wyden, and already passed the House with overwhelming support. The Tibet Policy and Support Act strengthens U.S. policy in Tibet while addressing one key and overriding issue: the selection of the next Dalai Lama. This can't be allowed to be controlled by the Communist Party, but only by Tibetan Buddhists. I'm sure that you support this basic principle, and I ask you to co-sponsor this bill and raise it with the Senate leadership for swift passage by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Now, the second bill is the Mongolian Third Neighbor Trade Act, introduced by Senators Sullivan and Cardin, and co-sponsored by Ranking Member Wyden and Majority Whip Thune. This bill would grant a democratic and independent Mongolia better access to U.S. market for cashmere products manufactured in Mongolia. We can go into this later. Mongolia is under extraordinary pressure and threat from China right now. This will greatly benefit Mongolia, create jobs for Mongolian women, and reinforce democratic institutions. It's a concrete way to strengthen democracy at a most critical time in the Indo-Pacific, and will help Mongolia remain independent. I call on the Senate to pass this bill as well as soon as possible. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to the questions.